You are standing in a torchlit corridor that smells of crushed myrtle and hot beeswax, listening to a locked door breathe. Somewhere on the other side, a boy the city has renamed Empress is being fitted with someone else's life. Bangles that aren't his, silk that scratches, a veil that turns the world to gauze. You can hear a man pacing, heel and heel again, no ordinary man, but the sort who can paint laws over the bodies of others as if they were walls. Imagine the hush of attendance, the whisper of a name that isn't a name, but an order, Sabina. Imagine being asked not merely to perform grief, but to become it. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. They will tell this story later with jokes. Romans loved jokes when they were afraid, but the first joke is a door opening. "Come," says the emperor, soft as a hand on a harp string. A boy steps into a room painted with night gardens and birds that never die, and he does not understand until the second breath that the name being spoken to him is not his own. Sabina, Nero says, tasting the syllables like a sacrament he has invented, and the attendants bow as if grief were a crown that can be passed from one head to another. The boy nods because the room is full of nodding, and because the first language of palaces is agreement. "Your Majesty," the chamberlain murmurs, the veil. "Hold still," whispers a woman with pearl pins between her teeth. "I'm not," the boy begins. "You are," says another voice. For him, you are. The dead woman is Poppaea Sabina, beautiful, shrewd, feathered with rumor, and the man who cannot let her die is Nero, singer, builder, monster, scapegoat, boyking too long at the center of the stage. Open any chronicle and the ink rearranges itself to fit the moral the writer needs. Nero as arsonist fiddling while Rome burned, or Nero as harried reformer opening his gardens to refugees and arranging grain shipments. One image makes a tidy villain, the other makes an untidy human being with too much power and too little restraint. Both are thin veils, both reveal the same face when the light shifts, a ruler who believed the world should answer to his imagination. Listen backwards. Poppaea is alive still, luminous and calculating, pregnant or rumored so. A quarrel thunders down a corridor. A kick, an illness, a tale sharpened after his fall. Sources disagree the way storm clouds disagree about where the lightning struck, but they agree on one thing: she is gone. The truth is a fugitive that leaves prints in more than one direction. What matters is what grief did with Nero. It put him to work. He built a golden house out of ashes. He tried to build a woman out of memory. Am I her? The boy asks nobody. Tonight, says the mirror. Tonight, echoes the man who owns the mirror. If you want to understand this night, you must learn the machine that hums beneath it, the old engine that turns bodies into politics. It is older than Nero and newer than us. It is the reason medieval kings staged the bedding of queens before watchful courtiers, lifting curtains like seals on a treaty. It is why brides were inspected like boarders, why sheets could serve as documents with stains for signatures, why a chamber could become a courtroom and a body a witness. The Romans did not invent the theater of flesh. They simply gave it better lighting. In the hours before the ceremony, the palace learns to whisper the right name. Sabina, says the steward, practicing until the sound is seamless. Sabina, says the scribe, committing theft to parchment. Sabina, says the guard at the door, and the word becomes the key that turns the lock. The boy's birth name is permitted to live only in his bones, where names have always hidden when the world goes hostile. He is led, eventually, to Greece, where the air itself believes it is literature, and where Nero can surround his grief with applause. The Praetorian prefect plays father of the bride. Courtiers murmur wedding wishes. Someone even repeats the old absurdity that the couple might be blessed with children. The absurdity is not an accident. It is obedience expressed as satire. It is Rome proving how completely it can pretend when pretending is the law. The veil falls. The city blinks. A boy disappears into a rolled away, a coin disappears into a fountain, with ceremony and a wish no one truly expects to be answered. Walk, whispers the chamberlain. How? The boy asks. As if you had always been walking like this, the chamberlain says with a kindness sharpened by fear. We imagine the blade only because there is no other way to imagine the silence. No doctors with anesthetics, no recovery rooms with quiet monitors. Just a command carried down a corridor until it becomes metal and heat. We do not need gore, we need comprehension. The operation is not a metaphor. It is a fact, the necessary violence that makes a fiction possible. When you are remade to repair a ruler's sorrow, you learn quickly how power confuses love with architecture. Closer, Nero says, and he means, be the proof that my grief can build a city. He gives himself the comfort that only empires can afford. He confuses possession with healing. He is not the first to do so, and he will not be the last. It is here that the philosophers arrive like men with lanterns in a catacomb, each holding the light differently. Augustine, a bishop stalking his own stormy heart, speaks of the libido dominandi, the lust to dominate. For Augustine, the sin of empire is not sensuality but sovereignty. Desire goes feral when it wants not a person, but the power to define a person. He might as well be writing marriage advice for palaces. Love that forces a beloved to become a mirror is only self-worship with good costumes. Aquinas, patient and meticulous, offers a carpenter's rule. A law that is not ordered to the common good ceases to be law. It becomes an act of violence with grammar. Dress it in lace and music, sign it with the prefect, parade it through Greek theaters. If it harms, it is counterfeit. He would say this softly, because truth that cuts needs a gentle hand. Erasmus, with folly perched on his shoulder, grins at the spectacle and calls it what it is, a coronation of absurdity. Princes, he says in so many words, love to be applauded for piety while they trample it with choreography. The blessings of the crowd, the veil, the titles, what is this if not folly enthroned and waving to the people? Machiavelli, drier, colder, more honest than his reputation, shrugs. The state runs on appearances as much as on food and iron. A prince must seem virtuous, must seem merciful, must seem faithful, even if he is not. But even he, the practical heretic of Florence, issues a warning in the margins. Cruelty should be well used, meaning swift and purposeful, then ended. A cruelty that has no end becomes a rope that eventually drags the prince behind it. Make a boy into a widow with a crown, and you are not done with the story. The story will not be done with you. Now step back. Rome is a city in rehearsal. The great fire has peeled the paint from the city's face and revealed both bone and imagination. Some will swear Nero sang of Troy as flames leaped, composing the empire into an opera. Others insist he rushed from Antium to open gardens, reduce grain prices, and direct relief. Both memories do the same work. They bind a man to a myth. Either way, a golden house rises on the ruin, corridors blooming with frescoes, ceilings fretted with stars that obey a private astronomy. Inside that house, a new Poppaea is being manufactured for an audience of one. Espirus. Nero says the name once in private like a man tasting a forbidden fruit. Sabina, he says louder, and the room breathes again. I can't be her, the boy says at last, not as protest, but as diagnosis. You can be what I need, Nero replies, and because his need is law, it becomes liturgy. Will it hurt? The boy whispers. "It already has," says a voice from the doorway. You could call that voice Rome. There are dinners that year where laughter empties itself too quickly, where the emperor demands that the air itself approve what the law has named. "Tell me," he asks one singer, who sings truer grief or joy. The singer chooses carefully and lives to sing again. There are baths where 1,000 hands know exactly how to look away. There are mornings when the empress practices how to greet petitioners from behind a veil, and an old woman mutters at the back, "We used to pray to Jupiter for rain. Now we pray to silk for mercy." We tell ourselves this is ancient because old wickedness feels like a vaccine against new. But the medieval world will take up the same instruments and tune them to a different key. The queen's wedding night becomes a public ritual, the bed a minor throne. Courtiers crowd the chamber, the curtain drawn like a legal document by witnesses who will later testify with red cheeks and grave nods. The holy words about two becoming one are translated into a single ugly sentence: "Your body is the treaty." Even the church, trying to sanctify the chaos of appetite, ends up scripting it. The sacrament becomes a theater that the poor imitate badly and the powerful perform with matinee and evening shows. What if I don't want to? The girl whispers to her new husband, barely older than she. "You do," he says, because he must say it, because the crowd will make it true. Across centuries, the hum is the same. Law using intimacy as its theater. Power answering fear with choreography. Grief disguised as policy. Bodies drafted as parchment and ink. Back in Rome, the lyre is tuned. Nero enters a garden designed to look like the memory of a song, cypresses like notes on his staff, fountains that behave like applause. "Closer," he says, and the boy steps into a shadow that has been taught to resemble shelter. "Do you love me?" Nero asks, and the question is an accusation disguised as a prayer. "I can be loyal," the boy says. "Loyalty is love," Nero replies, and for a moment he believes his own theology. Sporus learns to walk the colonnades with a small, correct sadness, as if memory were a hairstyle. He is given perfumes Poppaea favored. He is asked to prefer what she preferred, to frown when she would have frowned. Once, in a courtyard full of dappled shade and untrustworthy birdsong, he pauses before a statue of Proserpina being dragged downward by Hades and says quietly, "So only the lemon trees can hear, not every queen chooses her crown." A chamberlain overhears and pretends the sentence is a fragment of Greek poetry. It is safer to quote than to accuse. There are moments of tenderness too, which is perhaps the ugliest part. Monsters are not made of pure stone. Nero is sometimes kind, genuinely, and then more dangerous for it. He takes the boy's hand on a balcony and points to the city and says, like a child promising a toy, "All this is safer because you are with me." He believes it as he says it. And the boy, trained now to live on the kindness that follows injury, lets the sentence lie between them like a warm dog. To survive any captivity, you must teach yourself to love a few of its sounds. Rome keeps score. Enemies of Nero will later ink the tally into the public script, the assassinations, the disappearances, the ruin wrapped in lace. Friends will insist the ledger is rigged. History, coldly honest, says both kinds of people are right in ways that cancel nothing. What is not disputed is the theater, the wedding to the boy, the veil, the Greek applause, the role named Sabina. That is not a rumor, it is a scar. Now walk with me into a scriptorium far from Rome. Monks bent over skins, letters blooming like small obediences across the page. One, younger than the rest, pauses and rubs his eyes. "Brother," he asks, "why must we copy the story of kings?" His elder looks up, cracked lips smiling. "So that our children know what power looks like when it forgets God," he says. It is a medieval answer, but it holds more than piety. It holds a warning that does not age. The medieval world is not a single room, but many, connected by narrow doors called custom. In one, a noble bride is examined by dowagers whose experience is treated like jurisprudence. In another, a village sings a rude song outside a newlywed's house, chivalry, they call it, to enforce the community's will on private life. In a third, priests argue over whether consent makes marriage or ceremony does, while girls pray their words will be counted at least once in the decision. The feared rite of the first night, so often repeated, is largely a myth built later, but the fact it was believed tells you something dreadful about what people expected of lords. Law and intimacy catch and tangle like hooks in the dark. Aquinas would say carefully, humanely, that consent is the soul of marriage. He means, without willing hearts, the sacrament is only scenery. Theologians debate impediments, kinship, force, vows made elsewhere, and a dry list becomes a living barricade against coerced unions. But even holy logic can be used like a sword or a ladder. It is carried by men with interests and fears. In the wrong hands, even consent becomes a script merely prompting the right answer. Erasmus strolls through these chambers with his tilted smile. He writes praise of folly and jabs at princes who perform virtue with more devotion than they perform justice. He would look at a royal bedding and say, "Behold how chastity is supervised by a crowd. It must be very delicate to need so many eyes." His jest cuts because it is a mirror. Machiavelli visits last, measuring rooms with his eyes the way a general measures fields for ambush. He speaks softly and sounds like heresy because he refuses to lie for angels. Men judge more by the eye than the hand, he writes in effect. Appearances are your scaffold. He would not be surprised by Nero's marriage to a boy or by a medieval court's public bed. He would only ask what purpose the ritual serves and whether the prince can afford the hatred it purchases. His advice is not moral salvation. It is a map of danger. Return to Rome. After Nero, the script does not end. It changes directors. Nymphidius Sabinus, the prefect who helped unseat him, takes Sporus and calls him Poppaea, as if the title could be deeded alongside furniture. Otho, who had once been married to Poppaea before Nero claimed her, takes Sporus too. Then Vitellius, thick with appetite and ceremony, plans a spectacle of Proserpina in the arena with the bride to be publicly ravished, a ritual meant to devour a person and call it entertainment. The boy looks at the calendar and recognizes the final stanza of a long coercion. Is there any part of this that is mine? He asks a friend. The choice at the end, the friend answers, eyes down. What choice? To leave the play, the friend says, voice shaking. To leave it before it devours you. The chronicles are scant here and brittle. Some say he killed himself rather than be staged one more time. Some say he simply vanished, a mercy the page allows when it fears the next paragraph. Either way, he refuses his line. Either way, the stage lights lose him. Do you hear the questions that hum beneath these scenes like an undertone? What is a body worth in a world where the law is a costume? What happens to a soul taught to survive by pleasing the man who owns the stage? How many people have swallowed another's grief until it tasted like duty? It is tempting to call this a story about queerness, as if the tragic center were gender confusion, as if Sporus himself were the problem. That would be another theft. Rome was capacious in many things, but not in freedom. It tolerated sex across genders and stations so long as the hierarchy was maintained. Citizen penetrates, slave receives. Status remains unbroken. Power police desire by protecting the dominant from shame. Nero's marriage was obscene to the Roman elite not only because it involved a eunuch, but because it announced that the emperor could invert norms publicly and force the world to clap. The queerness isn't the tragedy, the tyranny is. There is another room you need to see, a small, clean space in the Domus Aurea where a painter has been instructed to put the sky on the ceiling. He paints constellations that will not consent to move. He paints a queen with a veil that looks like the inside of a pearl. He paints a boy whose face he has never seen, because the chamberlain said, "Make him beautiful but general." The painter thinks, general beauty is a kind of prison. And then he paints anyway, because paint is how he eats. Later, in the same palace, a poet reads a few lines about Orpheus and is rewarded with a bracelet so heavy it becomes a shackle. He recites again, this time a hymn to imperial mercy, and the room exhales relief like smoke. The poet is not a coward. He is a husband with debts. Rome lives on these transactions, the exchange of courage for bread, of honesty for safety, of silence for a room without chains. In the medieval city, scribes do another kind of accounting. They list dowries, trousseaux, obligations, nights owed, and harvests expected. Marriage is economics with candles. Behind the ledgers are girls who have memorized the sound of their own names and hope those names will not be sold. A village bride weeps, not from sorrow, but from fear that the women who inspect her will find her lacking in mysteries she never learned to name. A queen smiles like a statue as courtiers pretend they are not watching the curtain move. Everyone plays their part. Everyone tells themselves it is normal. Most rituals begin as protections and end as cages. Augustine returns like thunder in summer, late, sudden, clarifying. He says, underneath sermons and sadness, that the heart is restless when it loves the wrong thing in the wrong order. Put power first and people second, and you will end by calling cruelty care. He would understand Nero in a way that makes forgiveness both possible and dangerous. He would see a man who loved himself to the point of blindness and loved his pain above all other people's freedom. If you are waiting for a moral, stop. History is not a fable that exists to tuck you in. It is a mirror at odd angles. Sometimes it shows you what you are afraid to admit. Sometimes it shows you the room you are standing in without realizing it is a theater. The point is not to feel superior to the dead. The point is to be less easily tricked than they were by the next ceremony that demands you clap. So let us make a small inventory, not of dates and decrees, but of human sounds. The breath behind a door. The swallow a boy makes before he learns to answer to Sabina. The collective murmur of courtiers when a ritual lands correctly. The laugh stifled too late at an imperial joke. The mutter of an old woman who used to pray to Jupiter and now prays to silk. The whistle of a blade carried under a law. The sentence Augustine would have recognized as a prayer, "Let me love rightly." The soft click a ring makes when placed on a table at last, a circle that might be a bond or a bind. There is a modern room too, you know it well, where cameras hang like incense burners and the air smells like suggestion rather than frankincense. We have traded veils for lenses, curtains for content, courtiers for followers. But the engine hums the same. Bodies become platforms. Intimacy becomes spectacle. Grief becomes a product launch. We tell ourselves we have learned, and then we ask the next person to be our mirror because the old one broke. Why do you keep looking at me? A girl asks the world at large, scrolling. Because you're visible, the world answers, not unkindly. Because we have built temples to visibility and called them freedom. Does it like me? She asks, meaning the world, meaning the god of views. It likes you when you perform, the god replies. It likes you best when you are not quite yourself. We shake our heads at Nero and then reenact him with better cameras. That is why Sporus matters. Not because his suffering is exotic, but because it is familiar once you strip away the bronze and the Latin. He is the hinge of a door that never stops opening, the point at which private desire becomes public law, the moment when grief is legislated, the second when a human being is told that the way to survive is to erase himself so completely that even his name serves someone else's story.
Imagine, near the end, a last dialogue in a small room emptied for the next spectacle. Nero is dead, says a voice behind the curtain. And the play? The boy asks. The play survives, says the voice. It always does. What is my role now? Same as before. The voice says gently, like a friend.
Like a jailer. To teach the city what power looks like. He is silent for a long time. Then, no, and this no, which no one hears, is the most eloquent line in the whole performance. Centuries after, scholars argue footnotes beneath flickering lamps. Was Poppaea killed by accident, by malice, by illness? Did Nero sing while Rome burned, or did he mobilize grain and shelter? The violin did not exist, the rumor did. The relief did occur, the myth did too. The right of a lord to violate a bride on her wedding night was mostly a later slander, but the fear it describes felt true enough that people repeated it as if it were law. Myths decorate power like ivy. Sometimes the ivy chokes the house, sometimes it is only pretty. The task is to distinguish plant from brick before the storm. In a Florentine study, Machiavelli picks up his pen as if it were a sword and writes a book for princes that will be read by everyone but them. Do not be hated, he writes. It is his simplest, most neglected advice. The emperors after Nero learn this the hard way. Hatred learns to find friends. It finds them in gardens and barracks, in kitchens and temples, among men who have watched too many plays. In a cloister, Erasmus writes in the margins of his own wit, warning that the church can be so concerned with staging virtue that it forgets to feed the poor. He is not merely joking. He is crying in a voice trained to sound like laughter. He knows how easily a sacrament becomes a script. In a quiet cell in Hippo, Augustine confesses to God as if to a doctor, "This is what I desired. This is what I loved. I was wrong." He is trying to correct the order of his loves, to put people back where power had placed things and things where lust had placed gods. If he could speak to the boy in Rome, he would tell him the simplest mercy: your name belongs to you. In a Paris classroom, Aquinas leans over a desk covered in crumbs and argument and translates the law into a sentence a child could understand. A rule that hurts the common good is not a rule at all. You could stitch that on a banner and carry it through any century safely. History keeps walking down corridors lit by different oils. The doors look new each time. The locks sound familiar. Here is how I want this to end, not as consolation, but as clarity. You are in that first hallway again. The beeswax stings your nose. The door breathes. The city is on the other side, arranging itself into its favorite shape, a story that saves the strong from shame. You have a choice the boy did not have, because you are not trapped in his palace. You can decide what to applaud. You can choose which rituals to honor and which to starve of attention. You can hold a name, yours or someone else's, the way you would hold a moth, knowing how easily beauty bruises. When the noise dies, you can hear it, the tiniest sound, like a ring set gently on a table, a circle that might be a bond or a bind. Perhaps the ring is cut with a myth, perhaps it shows a door. Either way, the metal is cold and the image is sharp, and if you lift it to the light, you can see your own eye looking back at you. Do not look away. That is how the play ends. Or doesn't.